Press Media.
It's June 28th, 1959, and a farmer out picking blackberries near U.S. Highway 11 in Etowah County, Alabama, stumbles onto something in the driveway of an abandoned house. It's a human torso. No arms, no legs, face beaten past recognition.
The next day, 10 miles away, a mother pulls into the driveway of a rental property with her 3 kids in the car. And there's a second torso. Same highway, same condition.
No name, no ID, no arms or legs to match against anything. Just 2 men cut apart and scattered like litter along one of the busiest roads in the state.
Newspapers start calling it the torso murders. Alabama hadn't seen anything like it, and when police finally do crack the case, the answer is almost harder to believe than the crime itself.
Because the person who did it wasn't a gangster, or a drifter, or a madman, like a lot of the early theories guessed.
It was a 30-year-old farm girl named Viola Hyatt. History remembers her as the Alabama Axe Murderess, the torso slayer.
But what almost nobody talks about is why. Because Viola gave the police exactly 4 reasons to explain it. And then, for the rest of her life, she never said anything else about it. This is a case that most true crime fans have genuinely never heard of. And honestly, it's one of the strangest ones we have ever covered.
It's got a farmhouse that a reporter at the time described as eerie weird. It's got a homemade wheelbarrow. It's got a 12-gauge shotgun and a double-sided axe. And at the center of it, a woman nobody could get a straight answer out of. Not police, not her own lawyers, not the newspapers who chased her for the rest of her life.
So let's get into it. I'm Gina.
And I'm Amber. This is the case of Lee and Emmett Harper, and the woman who called herself fiancé to one of the men.
First, let's talk about who Viola Hyatt actually was, because the Axe Murderess headline tells you nothing about the person underneath it.
Viola Virginia Hyatt was born February 3rd, 1929, in a community called Rabbittown, Alabama, to a farmer named Martin Hyatt and his wife, Virgie. Virgie died when Viola was 5, and the next year, Martin remarried a woman named Jessie.
Viola grew up as an only child with her dad and stepmother on the family farm in White Plains, Alabama, about 15 miles northeast of Anniston. And that farm had been in the Hyatt family since before 1862.
A journalist named Don Brown visited the area during the investigation, and his description of it is honestly one of the more unsettling parts of this whole thing. He said White Plains would be daylight, and then suddenly dark, no lights. He described the farmhouse itself as eerie weird. Unpainted wood frame, a red brick chimney, a long porch. 40 acres, but barely any grass on it, just hard clay. There was 4 huge trees and a driveway with a crude, homemade wooden gate.
He said the whole area gave off a feeling of primitiveness and backwardness. Old shacks, dirt, things scattered everywhere. Generally, in his words, it was a mess.
So that's the backdrop. Now, Viola herself, by every account, she was close to her father. She followed him around constantly. She helped him work the fields, and neighbors called her a mainstay of the farm. This wasn't a girl playing at farm life. She was doing the actual labor.
The farm grew corn and cotton, plus a garden, pigs, and chickens. And as a young girl, Viola learned how to butcher hogs, which, hold on to that detail because it's going to matter later.
At age 7, her father taught her how to shoot. When she grew up, she did daily target practice with him. The neighbors called her an excellent shot, and she went hunting with her father regularly. They also loved to attend all-day country singing sessions together, driving to churches all over North Alabama to sit and listen to gospel music for hours. That was their thing.
As for her personality, this is where it gets interesting, because the accounts are almost contradictory. Neighbors described her as friendly, jolly, a little different, but as nice as she could be, smart, shy, soft-spoken, and well-mannered.
The owner of the local grocery store, Mrs. C.H. Reed, told the Birmingham News that people seemed to like her and that nobody would say a word against her or her family. Mrs. Reed also said Viola loved to read. She'd sit in the porch swing all summer with any magazine she could get her hands on, and she loved cats. You'd never see her without some around.
Her own father described her as having a right smart temper, and neighbors told the Anniston Star that she'd been known to be rough and wild at times, and that she had this peculiar habit. She carried a gun or a knife with her wherever she went. After the murders, the Montgomery Advertiser reported that most people were shocked Viola was the killer, but they were, quote, quick to admit that she had acted rather strangely on numerous occasions, end quote.
Viola went to school through 9th grade. Then, according to her dad, she got mad at her teacher and quit. And 6 other students quit right along with her. That was the extent of her formal education.
Okay, but now I'm wondering what that teacher did to make them so mad and for 7 students to quit all at once.
For real.
You know? Some bad must have happened. And at the time of the murders, Viola wasn't married, but she was dating a man named Lee Harper. According to one paper, they'd been together for 5 years.
So now let's back up and talk about who Lee Harper actually was, and his brother Emmett, who's about to become just as central to this story.
Lee and Emmett Harper were 2 of 6 brothers, born to parents Joe and Fanny Harper. Lee was the 3rd oldest. Emmett was the youngest of the 6. They grew up near Gant, Alabama, and went to elementary school in Andalusia.
Lee was born March 11th, 1906. He was 55 years old when he died. Emmett was born October 26, 1914, in Covington, Alabama. He was 48 when he died.
As teenagers, the brothers pooled their tenant farming savings and bought a small store with a house attached out on Highway 29 in a place called Clearview. They lived in the house behind the store. The store sold fish bait and rented boats, but it never really took off. Once it closed, the brothers would still go back there to vacation.
Both brothers served in World War II, and Emmett survived the Bataan Death March. For anyone who doesn't know what the Bataan Death March is, here's a little Cliff's Notes history lesson for you. On April 9th, 1942, 75,000 United States soldiers and Filipino soldiers were surrendered to Japanese forces after battling for months in harrowing conditions. The soldiers were deprived of food, water, medical attention, and were forced to walk 65 miles to confinement camps throughout the Philippines. Thousands died. And those who did survive faced being a prisoner of war and the brutality of their Japanese captors. So friends and family later said that Emmett talked about the war often.
After the war, they bounced between jobs. Lee worked as a welder. Emmett did construction work when he could find it.
Everyone who described the brothers used almost identical language. Mild personalities, congenial, drank a lot, but harmless. Their sister-in-law told the Montgomery Advertiser they were mighty good boys. A cousin said Lee especially loved kids. He'd spend his money on them, and they were crazy about him. She said the brothers stuck together pretty close.
The owner of a local cafe told the Birmingham News, quote, "They were pretty good men, only they drank a good bit, but they never caused anybody any trouble," end quote.
But there's another side to this too, because Viola's father, Martin, painted a much darker picture of what these two were actually like once they moved onto his property.
Here's how they ended up there in the first place. According to Martin, Lee started coming around the farm in about 1952. Martin said he first met him when Lee brought Viola home from Anniston one day. Lee kept coming back, and Martin figured he was a nice enough fellow. Quote, "Until I heard better." End quote.
At some point, Lee moved a small aluminum trailer onto the Hyatt property without asking. Martin said, quote, "I guess the girl told him to put it there," end quote. The trailer was tiny, homemade, propped up on concrete blocks, sitting about 80 to 90 feet behind the farmhouse.
Then, in around 1958, Emmett moved into the trailer too. And according to Martin, that's when things got ugly. He said the brothers drank constantly and fought each other, often violently. Martin's quote is honestly incredible. He said, "I couldn't stand Lee. He would get mad at you before you could say scat. He was all the time wanting to kill somebody. I've had to get up at midnight to quiet them down." End quote.
And then Martin describes one specific night. The brothers had gone into Anniston. Emmett came to Martin's door in the middle of the night, hollering for him to get up, saying, "Lee's about to kill me." Martin opened the door, and Emmett was standing there with blood streaming down his face. Lee had stomped him and dragged him along the highway.
So this is the environment Viola was living next to. Two brothers drinking heavily, physically brutalizing each other, camped out 80 feet from her bedroom window.
And in the middle of all of that, Viola told police that she and Lee had, quote, "an understanding of an engagement," end quote, that they were planning to marry in the late summer of 1959.
But after the murders, when a reporter asked Martin whether Viola and Lee were really going to get married, he gave a much more complicated answer. He said, quote, "No, I don't guess he and Viola were planning to be married. I'd heard they were sort of figuring on marrying. I don't know when, but she wouldn't marry him," end quote, because Lee had threatened to beat her up. Martin told Lee, quote, "I would kill him if he laid a hand on her, and I meant it too," end quote.
So that's the whole cast, laid out before anything happens. A close-knit but volatile farm family. Two war veteran brothers with a serious drinking problem and a violent streak toward each other. And Viola, right in the middle, armed at all times with a temper her own father had called right smart.
Now, let's get into what actually happened on the highway.
So we're back to what we said at the very beginning, June 28th, 1959. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, a local farmer is out picking blackberries near an abandoned house just off of US Highway 11 in Etowah County. He finds a torso lying in the driveway.
The house had been padlocked and empty for years. It used to be a headquarters for bootleggers and gamblers, and it sat far enough off the road that most passing drivers couldn't even see it.
The torso still had its head attached, but the face was mutilated beyond recognition. The arms and legs had been removed. He was wearing tattered men's underwear, an undershirt and undershorts, and nothing else. There was no blood at the scene and no sign of a struggle, which told police right away this man was killed somewhere else, then dumped here. Investigators would end up calling him Mr. X.
Because Highway 11 ran all the way from Louisiana to New Jersey, police theorized initially that the killer and the victim could have come from literally anywhere in the country. Authorities called it one of the most crude and brutal murders Etowah County had ever seen.
About 15 feet from where the torso was dumped was a 90-foot deep well, plus heavy underbrush that could have easily hidden a body. So investigators started wondering, did the killer just not know the well and the brush were right there? Or did he actually want this body to be found?
The state toxicologist, a man named Robert Johnson, performed the autopsy. He estimated the man had been dead about 18 hours and that the body had likely been dumped just a few hours before it was discovered.
So what did the autopsy reveal? He'd been shot with a shotgun at close range, then beaten in the face and the back of the head with something blunt. After that, his arms and legs had been cut at the joints with a knife, and then a heavier, sharper tool, likely an axe or a meat cleaver, had been used to hack through the bone. Johnson said it looked, quote, like a professional, end quote, had done it.
The victim was a clean-shaven white man who had recently had a haircut. He was estimated to be somewhere between 40 and 50 years old, about 5 feet 8 inches tall, or 172 centimeters tall, and weighing in around 170 pounds, or 77 kilograms. He had black hair that was going gray. His features were rounded, and he had a short and stocky build.
The next day, Circuit Solicitor L. Charles Wright told a reporter, quote, "I've never seen anything like it around here. About all we know right now is that whoever dumped him here certainly knew the house was abandoned," end quote. He also floated an early theory that this was some kind of revenge killing and that the arms and the legs were removed specifically to prevent identification.
And then, the very next day, at almost the exact same time, it happens again.
Around noon on the 29th, a woman named Mrs. Jack Partlow pulls into the driveway of a rental house with her 3 kids in the car. This house was 10 miles away in St. Clair County, right off the same highway. The previous tenants had moved out about a month earlier. The curtains were still up. The Partlows were doing repairs before renting it out again, and they lived just 200 yards away.
And there in the driveway is a second torso. Investigators call him Mr. Y.
This one was completely nude, except for a scrap of cloth loose around his neck. Hang on to that, it'll come up again. Otherwise, the scene was almost identical to the first. No blood, no struggle, clearly dumped there after the fact.
Once Johnson had both bodies to compare, patterns started emerging. Both men had eaten a meal about an hour before they died, likely together. Both were killed around the same time, in the late afternoon or early evening of June 27th.
One difference. Mr. Y had been shot on the left side of his face, not straight on like Mr. X. Johnson theorized Mr. Y might have been shot second and had just enough time to start turning away.
Mr. X's body tested at 0.14% blood alcohol, just under the legal intoxication line at the time. Mr. Y's body was too decomposed to test.
Neither body had any distinguishing scars or marks, and nobody matching their general description had been reported missing anywhere in the area, which led police to a theory that would turn out to be eerily close to correct, that this might be a family affair or that somebody out there knew exactly what happened and just wasn't coming forward.
By putting everything together, investigators built out a working profile. They believed the 2 men knew each other and were possibly related. They'd been killed and dismembered by the same person in the same place. The killer knew the victims personally. The killer was local, because a tourist passing through wouldn't be carrying an axe and a shotgun and wouldn't know these back roads well enough to find 2 separate abandoned houses to dump bodies in. They believed the killer was actually afraid of these men. This was revenge. And they believed the killer wanted the bodies found, just not identified.
People living along Highway 11 were understandably terrified. Folks stopped traveling at night. Houses that had never been locked before were locked at all times.
By the 30th, theories were flying. Some thought it was a gangland slaying, with the bodies dumped as the killers drove down the highway. Others thought it was connected to bootlegging. This was still Dry County territory, and Highway 11 used to be called the Whiskey Trail. And some thought it was simply a madman who got some kind of sick pleasure out of dismembering people.
That same day, around 100 officials from every county the highway ran through combed the roadside for the missing arms and legs. They searched wooded areas, empty houses, creeks, lakes for 7 hours, and nothing. They'd keep searching on and off for the next 3 weeks.
On July 1st, a Gadsden artist named John King was brought in to sketch what the 2 victims might have looked like in life, based on their features. Those sketches ran in newspapers across the state, alongside detailed physical descriptions, right down to what the men had eaten for their last meal. Mr. Y had eaten tomatoes, beef, onions, and French dressing. Mr. X had eaten dried beans, tomatoes, onions, and coffee with cream.
That same day, with no identification and no leads, the two torsos were buried in Alabama City Cemetery.
On July 2nd, investigators traced the underwear Mr. X was found in to its manufacturer, a company that made cheap undershorts sold for about 50 cents a pair, mostly shipped to 7 towns in northeast Alabama. Combined with everything else, this told police Mr. X was very likely a local man.
By this point, police had chased down over 100 leads. None of them went anywhere.
On July 9th, Governor John Patterson put up a $1,000 reward. Authorities also started combing 35,000 acres at a nearby army camp, not because of a specific tip, but because it was remote, thinly populated land close to where the first torso was found. The bodies were also exhumed from the cemetery and put in cold storage, in case any new evidence turned up.
By July 13th, based on everything gathered so far, police believed this. The murder weapons, a shotgun and an axe, were tools a farmer or rural resident would own. Leaves and outdoor debris were found embedded in the cut ends of the limbs, meaning the dismemberment happened outside. And whoever did this either let the blood soak into the ground or washed it away in a creek because there would have been an enormous mess. They also believed lifting 2 100-plus pound torsos was too much for one person alone to manage.
So the profile now is rural, local, familiar with farm tools, and probably more than one person.
And then on July 15th, everything cracks open, but almost by accident.
A highway patrolman named Harry Sims is stopped on the side of a road when a man walks up and mentions he'd heard a welder from over near Alexandria hadn't shown up for work. Sims thinks, maybe that's one of our torsos. He calls a friend in Alexandria who doesn't know anything directly, but happens to know a supervisor at the plant where the welder worked. That supervisor confirms it. A man named Lee Harper had been on a 2-week vacation and hadn't come back to work as scheduled on the 13th. Instead, a woman had called in and asked for his vacation to be extended, and it was approved. The supervisor said Lee lived in a trailer somewhere out in the Nance Creek, White Plains area.
So around 10 p.m., Sims asks another patrolman, Herman Chapman, to help him track down this trailer. They start driving around at midnight once their shift ends.
By 1 a.m., they still can't find it, so they flag down a passing motorist, who, it turns out, actually knows Lee Harper personally. Sims asks if Lee lives alone. The motorist says no. He lives with his brother, Emmett. Sims asks when he last saw them. The motorist says 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then he leads the officers straight to the Hyatt farm and to the Harper brothers' trailer.
And right there, the officers see it. Blood stains around the outside of the trailer, and a shotgun blast hole in the door that's been patched over with wood cement. Martin Hyatt would later tell police the door had been shot by accident during last hunting season. A journalist who covered the case, Don Brown, believed Martin actually knew all along that Viola had done it and was covering for her.
The officers call for backup around 2 a.m. When investigators arrive and talk to the Hyatts, the family sticks to the story. The brothers are on vacation down in Andalusia, and a couple of investigators actually fly down there to check and find out the brothers haven't been seen in that area since December. That's when the full search of the farm begins.
And honestly, it's easy to see why nobody had noticed the brothers were missing for 3 straight weeks. The local cafe owner said everyone figured they were just on their planned vacation. A neighbor told police, quote, "Those brothers never came around nobody. That's why we didn't miss them," end quote.
Here's a wild footnote. If that one random tip about a missing welder hadn't come in, police might have solved this within a day or two anyway, because a Birmingham news artist had already been hired to draw new sketches of the victims based on more detailed skull measurements, and they were set to be published on July 17th. Those new sketches look so much like the actual Harper brothers that investigators later said they were sure someone would have recognized them instantly.
And separately, toxicologist Johnson had used lab techniques to bring out a faded stencil on that scrap of cloth found around Mr. Y's neck. It read LEEHA-ER, Lee Harper. He told the police days earlier he suspected that's exactly who Mr. Y was.
So, multiple threads were converging on the same answer at almost the same moment. But it was that roadside tip about a missing welder that actually got officers standing outside that trailer first.
On July 16th, dozens of investigators descend on the Hyatt farm. The family stays cordial, sticking to the vacation story for most of the day. Investigators noticed Viola seemed visibly shaken while they searched the property. Her father just sat and watched them and kept feeding his chickens like it was any other day.
In the afternoon, Viola starts to break. 4 separate times, she gets right up to the edge of telling them something and then pulls back and says, quote, "I don't know nothing. I'm scared," end quote.
Investigators brought long metal punching rods to probe the ground around the farm, searching for buried arms and legs.
At one point, a reporter asked Martin point blank if he thought his daughter did it. He said, quote, "I don't believe she did it. She might have done it. I don't know," end quote. Wow, he sounds real sure about what his daughter is capable of. He told police he and his wife had gone to bed around 9 that night, hadn't heard any gunshots, and hadn't noticed anything unusual in the 3 weeks since.
Around 7:30 that evening, 30-year-old Viola, her father, and her stepmother are all taken in for questioning. Her parents are released a few hours later once police determined they weren't involved.
The sheriff, Dewey Colvard, later told a reporter, quote, "Boy, I'm real glad it's over. We've worked hard and long. I've sure lost a lot of sleep," end quote.
But it wasn't actually over yet, because first, Viola lied. A lot.
Initially, she told police she'd driven the brothers to the bus station in Oxford the night before the first torso turned up, claiming they were headed to their old place in Clearview near Andalusia.
At one point during questioning, she even named her ex-boyfriend, a man named Dewey Carroll, as the actual killer. She claimed she'd seen 2 bodies next to his car and heard him drive off. Police arrested Dewey. Then Viola changed her story again and said he wasn't involved after all. He was released.
After close to 6 hours of interrogation, at around 2:30 in the morning, Viola finally said, quote, "I have something to show you," end quote.
And then she told them everything.
On the evening of June 27th, Viola went to Lee and Emmett's trailer with her father's 12-gauge shotgun. Lee was sitting near the door. She shot him in the face first. As Emmett bent down over his brother's body, she turned and shot him in the side of the face.
She stripped most of their clothing off, dragged both bodies to the front of the trailer, and used a double-sided axe to cut off their arms and legs. She loaded the limbs and torsos into a homemade wheelbarrow and moved everything to Lee's own car, a 1955 Chevrolet sedan. Arms and legs went in the back seat, the torsos went in the trunk.
Then, according to reporting at the time, Viola drove through the Talladega National Forest into Cleburne County, throwing limbs out of the car as she went. She looped back over part of the same route, heading towards Gadsden. Driving along Highway 11, the old Whiskey Trail, she stopped near a house in Steele and left one torso by the chimney. Then she drove on toward Whitney Junction, looking for a second abandoned house for the other torso.
Mr. X, Emmett, ended up about 38 miles from the farm. Mr. Y, Lee, ended up about 49 miles away. Viola told police she genuinely didn't know the areas she was driving through and had no idea the 2 houses she chose were even vacant.
After her confession, she led police out along the route, and they were able to recover almost all of the missing limbs. 2 legs turned up about 12 feet apart along a road in Etowah County. 2 arms were found roughly a mile apart along another road 10 miles outside Piedmont.
2 arms and 2 legs, though, weren't found. Viola said she'd thrown a pair of legs off of a bridge in the Tallapoosa River and dumped a pair of arms at a roadside pull-off on a mountain outside Piedmont. Police didn't think they'd ever recover them.
After showing officers where she dumped everything, the whole group headed back to the Hyatt farm so Viola could reenact the murders on site. Her father and stepmother sat on the porch the entire time. According to the Birmingham News, there was no embrace, no visible emotion between them. Quote, "Neither parent rose to meet the woman. Then they went inside." End quote.
Viola showed officers something buried in the dirt of the chicken yard. Then she showed them the trailer, then the wheelbarrow, then a cornfield where she'd buried the axe.
When police searched Lee's car, which Viola had apparently been driving around in since the murders, the back seat was described as caked with dried blood. Quote, "The seat appeared once to have been drenched thoroughly with blood." End quote. A blood-stained hat was still sitting on the front seat. Inside the trailer, blood was found soaked into a rug pad and several pieces of furniture, and there was evidence someone had tried to scrub blood off the front steps. The chief investigator estimated Viola had probably spent close to a week cleaning up after herself.
When she was finished walking the police through everything, Viola went inside the farmhouse and changed clothes. She came back out wearing a dress and her best white shoes, hair combed, and posed for photographs before getting into the police car. Her stepmother watched her go, then walked to the barn and started milking a cow.
On the drive to jail, when someone asked how she felt, Viola said she felt better now that she'd told them what happened. She refused to give a motive until she'd had a nap. This woman is next level. There's so many questions.
One sheriff, Roy Sneed, said that while Viola rode around pointing out where she dumped the body parts, she was, quote, "cool as a cucumber on a cool morning," end quote. The only moment she broke down and cried the entire time was when she had to show the officers the axe.
After her nap, Viola finally gave police 4 possible motives. She never elaborated on any of them, not once, for the rest of her life. 1, the brothers had sexually abused her. 2, they drank too much. 3, they were rude to her father. 4, she'd had an argument with Lee over his car. Apparently, he'd taught her to drive and given her her own set of keys, and she'd more or less had free use of it whenever she wanted.
And that's it. That's every explanation Viola Hyatt ever gave for killing 2 men and cutting their bodies into pieces. She died without ever expanding on any of it. To this day, nobody actually knows why.
Once word got out that Viola had been arrested, hundreds of people drove out to the Hyatt farm just to look at it. At one point, police counted as many as 20 cars a minute passing the house.
Meanwhile, investigators kept working to confirm every detail of Viola's story. The sheriff said she'd apparently kept disposing of the brothers' belongings right up until the moment she was arrested, driving around scattering their possessions across the county. She'd burned their clothes and IDs on the farm property.
On July 21st, one of the missing legs was found floating in the Tallapoosa River. That same day, 4 of the brothers' shoes turned up along a highway near Piedmont. The other leg and 2 other arms were never located.
On July 22nd, Lee and Emmett were buried near their childhood home in Andalusia next to their parents.
Investigators also discovered that on July 13th and 14th, while Lee and Emmett's bodies were sitting in a cemetery 2 counties away, Viola had used a neighbor's phone to call Lee's supervisor, asking that his vacation be extended, not once, but multiple times.
And neighbors had their own story to tell. A couple who lived across the road from the Hyatt farm, the Halls, said that around midnight on June 27th, they woke up to at least 8 shotgun blasts. They genuinely thought their own lives were in danger. After the shots, they heard screaming, someone yelling, "No, no, no." Then another shot. Then quiet. Then several more shots.
Alton Hall checked his own front yard but saw nothing, so he figured the noise came from the Hyatt place. He didn't go check on it because, in his words, the Harper brothers were often drunk and fighting, and Viola herself was known to practice shooting at all hours, just not usually that late. About an hour later, he heard a car leave the farm, and the next morning, around 8:30, he saw Viola arrive home. When he asked about the gunshots, she told him she'd just taken the brothers to the bus station for their annual vacation.
Multiple newspapers at the time raised the same question we're probably all thinking. How does one woman drag two full-grown men out of a trailer, cut them into pieces, and load them into a vehicle completely alone?
But most investigators ultimately concluded she'd done exactly that. Viola stood 5'8" and weighed around 175 pounds, described in photos as stocky and strong, and she'd worked hard physical labor on that farm her entire life. Remember, she'd learned to butcher hogs as a little girl.
Not everyone was convinced, though. The state's public safety director, Floyd Mann, told reporters, quote, "I wouldn't be at all surprised if she had some help," end quote. However, nobody else was ever charged.
On August 13th, a grand jury handed down 2 indictments for first-degree murder.
While Viola waited in jail, she had almost no visitors, just her father, a couple of ministers, a cousin, and her attorney. She spent most of her time alone, reading. The sheriff described her as no trouble at all, unusually quiet.
But she also completely refused to cooperate with her own defense attorneys, and that refusal to talk eventually raised a much bigger question. Was she even mentally competent to stand trial?
On September 18th, her lawyers told the judge that Viola, quote, appears to be insane and appears to be unable to understand the nature of the charges and proceedings to be had against her, end quote. The prosecution disagreed. Judge Leslie Longshore ordered her committed to Bryce Hospital in Tuscaloosa until she could be, quote, restored to her right mind, end quote. Her arraignment and trial, both scheduled for that September, were postponed indefinitely.
Nearly 5 months later, on February 10th, 1960, doctors declared Viola sane and competent to stand trial. She was transferred back to the county jail that same day.
Even then, she kept refusing to talk to her own lawyers. One of them even said, quote, she seems willing to talk with everyone but her attorneys. She apparently hasn't wanted to discuss all of the case with us yet, end quote. He said their plan was to enter both a not guilty plea and a not guilty by reason of insanity plea.
On March 4th, that's exactly what happened. Trial was set for March 14th.
When the trial actually began, the courtroom filled up completely. People were turned away and stood out in the hallway just to be near it.
But about an hour in, the judge called a recess. And when the jury came back, they were told a deal had been reached. Viola would plead guilty in exchange for a sentence of life in prison.
Lee and Emmett's brother, Bob Harper, took the stand to formally identify Lee's body. An investigator testified that Viola had confessed the murder to him directly. Then the jury was sent out simply to return the verdict that had already been agreed to. A short time later, they came back. Guilty. Life sentence.
Then a second jury was seated, this time for Emmett's murder, and the entire process repeated.
On March 17th, Viola was formally sentenced. She barely spoke during the proceeding, only answering the judge's basic questions. Her name, her age, her occupation. Under Alabama law at the time, she'd be eligible for parole in 10 years.
After the sentencing, her father told the Birmingham News, quote, "I'm gonna get her out of there if I live," end quote. He mentioned a small cross and a watch he'd brought her that morning and said, quote, "I thought Viola looked fine after I dressed her up," end quote. He added, "Me and that girl was real close."
Her defense attorneys, separately, told a reporter, Quote, "She never would tell us exactly what happened," end quote. They said when they'd pressed her about whether the brothers had sexually assaulted her, all she said back was, "It was worse than that." She never explained what that meant either.
On March 18th, Viola was sent to Julia Tutwiler Prison in Wetumpka to begin her sentence.
A year later, the prison superintendent told a reporter that Viola was, quote, "a most cooperative prisoner. She hasn't given us a minute of trouble. She is pleasant and cooperative. She doesn't complain. She gets along fine with the other women, and she has joined our softball team. She is the scorekeeper," end quote. The superintendent added that Viola showed no lingering signs of the sullenness that had gotten her sent to the mental hospital in the first place.
Inside, Viola worked in the prison's garment factory, operating a sewing machine. Prisoners were allowed visitors twice a month. Her most frequent guest was a cousin named Luther. Her father's health, meanwhile, had been declining steadily since her arrest.
In July of 1960, Viola was allowed to visit him in an Anniston hospital after he underwent surgery. Less than a year later, on May 3, 1961, Martin Hyatt died in his sleep at the farmhouse. He was 76 years old. Viola was allowed to attend his funeral the next day. And years later, when her stepmother died, she was allowed to attend that funeral too.
After serving exactly 10 years, the minimum required under her sentence, Viola applied for parole. On April 14, 1970, a 3-person parole board voted unanimously to release her. By every account, she'd been a model prisoner the entire time. No incidents, no rule violations, total compliance.
On April 20th, 40-year-old Viola walked out of prison and moved in with an aunt and uncle in Jacksonville, Alabama. And then, essentially, she disappeared from public life. She refused every interview request for the rest of her life, and so did her family. She didn't work. She lived on a fixed income. She didn't drive, didn't shop much, and reportedly saved all of her spare change in jars around the house.
Eventually, she developed a serious leg condition and had to start using a walker. From 1990 until she died, she lived in a mobile home community in Jacksonville called Tuckaway Village. Oddly enough, the neighbors there lovingly nicknamed her the mayor of Tuckaway Village because she always knew everything that was happening in the park.
The woman once called the Alabama Axe Murderess spent her final decade being the friendly neighborhood gossip hub of a trailer park. She spent most of her days reading her Bible out on the porch.
On June 12, 2000, Viola Hyatt died in the hospital. She was 71. Her funeral was kept private, specifically so the media couldn't show up.
And she took the real reason she did it with her forever.
So here's what actually sits at the center of this case when you strip away the headline. A woman who grew up hunting, reading, singing gospel songs with her dad, gentle enough that the neighbor said she'd do anything to help them, and violent enough to carry a knife everywhere she went.
2 brothers who were, by nearly every account, mighty good boys, who never caused anybody trouble, who were also, according to the one person who lived closest to them, drunk and dangerous enough that their own landlord had to physically break up their fights in the middle of the night.
And somewhere in between those 2 versions of events is whatever actually happened inside that little aluminum trailer on the night of June 27, 1959. Viola gave police 4 fragments of a motive and then never said another word. Quote, "They done me wrong," end quote. That's it. That's the whole explanation history ever got.
We may genuinely never know what really went on out there, but we do know this. Viola Hyatt lived exactly as quietly after prison as she'd lived on that farm before it all happened. No confession, no book deal, no interview, just a porch, a Bible, and a trailer park that adored her without ever really knowing her.
What do you think happened? Do you have any thoughts?
I bet they had been drinking. Something had to have happened. I mean, maybe they did sexually assault her. And she finally snapped and went, "I am tired of your shit," and took care of it herself.
That's what I'm thinking. I don't even think it was like a one-time thing. If they were drunks like that and they lived on the property, it sounds like there was probably a history of assault there, and she met her wit's end and was like, I can't do this anymore, and snapped. You can't really blame her for that if that's actually what happened, because those 4 motives, I think 3 of them are pretty reasonable. Not that murder is ever the answer, but like, as a woman, you hit your limit. And she wasn't, and I don't think she had help either. Like, she's a strong chick. She could have easily handled that herself. And maybe her dad did know. And he was just like, yeah, they were shitty people. I don't know. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. Who knows?
Who knows?
I don't know. I'm glad she got to live out the rest of her life in peace, though.
Peaceful. Yep.
Yeah. Well, we apologize if you were hoping for a WTF this week, but we just couldn't pass up this case to share. We'll be back next week with a new WTF, so be sure to follow us on Instagram at Weird True Crime and subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss it.
Let us know if you've heard of this case before or not. And one last thing before we go. We have to give a well-deserved shout-out to Haley Gray for her incredible and thorough research she's known for. We love you.
We do love you. Until next time, stay safe.
And make good choices. Bye.
Bye.